first case study we're going to hear from is from Ohio. Joel Hunt is the program administrator for Ohio DOT's Highway Beautification and Pollinator Habitat Program. In addition to coordinating roadside pollinator habitat projects, Joel focuses on litter prevention, vegetation management, and aesthetic improvements on road construction projects. Joel has worked with the department for 20 years. So welcome, Joel.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Iris, for inviting me here today to talk with you. So before I begin my presentation today, I'm going to give you a quick timeline on how ODOT got to where we are with our roadside pollinator habitat program. Back in the 1990s, ODOT planted wildflowers around the state strictly for aesthetics. And while they were pretty to look at, they were very expensive to maintain and they provided little benefit to wildlife. And so we abandoned the program. And then in 2011, ODOT got together with Pheasants Forever and the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, and we planted our first roadside pollinator habitat on the western side of Ohio. And the project was really successful, so we changed our seed mix a little bit and started planting them in other places around the state. So in 2015, ODOT became a founding partner of the Ohio Pollinator Habitat Initiative. And then at the beginning of this year, we created a standalone highway beautification and pollinator habitat program to capture all the opportunities to install roadside pollinator habitats around the state. So what I'm going to talk about with you today are a few examples of projects that we have undergone so far this year. And I put these pictures up here not because I'm a narcissist, but because when you're on the other side of the camera, you have to be able to take complex information and boil it down to about 3 talking points, and you have to be able to deal with controversy. And so my background is 20 years with the department as a public information officer. I have a journalism and public relations degree. And the way that I run my program is basically built on communication strategy. So Ohio is a very diverse state, and working with groups and our own internal people up in Cleveland is a lot different than working with somebody in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. So what I do is a lot of messaging and marketing, and you need to know your audience, as I said. You need to utilize the media as much as you can and know your limitations. I'm not a biologist or a botanist. What I do is project coordination and outreach, and so I bring those technical experts to the table, and I spend a lot of my time managing our Pheasants Forever personal services contract, and they're in charge of site locations, installation maintenance, and long-term monitoring. So as I said, we are a founding partner of the Ohio Pollinator Habitat Initiative. The core partners are our Department of Natural Resources, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Department of Agriculture, our Rehab and Corrections, Pheasants Forever, and our Soil and Water Conservation Districts. And they've helped us make great strides in delivering projects so far this year. I think Gabe Carnes with Ohio State University is on the webinar today. He handles some research for us, and OPHI also helps us with outreach, and most importantly, they give our program credibility. So I'm going to go over a few examples of projects that we've worked on so far this year. The first one is exciting to me. We got a lot of press coverage on it. It's a Brownfield to Blooms project. And then I'm going to talk about our education centers and these other topics that I have on the screen here. So, about an hour east of Columbus in a city called Newark, ODOT had a facility, its district headquarters, about 15 years ago. Fortunately, we do things differently now than we did then. In the back of the facility, we had a test lab, and after the guys were done testing the different materials, they were throwing solvents out on the ground behind the building. and unfortunately it contaminated the groundwater, and we needed to move our location and tear down surrounding structures, displace people. And so this property, this 4-acre property within the city limits, is just sat idle inside a fence. And so we were thinking at the beginning of the year, what can we do with this site to make it more valuable? And so we decided to do the whole 4 acres in a pollinator habitat. And we were going to research our roadside pollinator habitat mix to see how it performs inside urban settings. And so we have the 4 plots. And we also decided that it would be a good olive branch for the community, since what we did to them was detrimental, and we got beat up in the press about it quite a bit. So I reached out to the mayor's office and the surrounding neighbors to give them advance warning that we're going to be spraying off the existing vegetation, and so when everything goes brown, that they understood it wasn't because of the chemicals coming up through the ground. So the Central Ohio newspaper picked up the story, and it's since been picked up by one of our TV stations, and it's been positive, so we're excited about that. In July, we opened up our first pollinator habitat education center at our Welcome Center coming in from Michigan. The Department of Tourism contacted us and said this rest area is undergoing a huge renovation. As part of the project, they were going to move parking lots and change the driveways, and so there was going to be a lot of disturbed earth, and they wanted to know if we could do some sort of a wildflower beautification project as part of the bigger project. So we came in late in the design process, literally just the last week before they were going to sell the contract, and we carved off a 3rd acre to put in a native wildflower demonstration garden with native grasses. And although it's not a true pollinator habitat, it's a mulched area, and we planted things in clusters. It serves as an informational garden for the hundreds of thousands of motorists that travel through that rest area each year. And so we have interpretive signs that we worked with Cardno to design, and we also designed a wildflower seed packets that has the roadside mix that we use for sale in the vending machines, and 100% of the profits that are made from those seed sales go to help a program for the visually impaired. This story was picked up by the Associated Press, and it started the conversation about bringing back roadside parks in Ohio. So it was a really positive story for us. And you can see in the upper left-hand corner, they actually did a live story at noon during the opening. And then in the lower left-hand corner, there's a prototype of a new welcome center that's going to be built on the western side of Ohio. There's plans over the next 10 years to put 5 new welcome centers. And what's different about this now is that we're at this, we have a seat at the table in the design process rather than coming in at the end. So that was a huge battle to get our statewide facilities people on board, because their biggest fear and the lessons that we learned from the 1990s project is that it's good to come in and plant these things, but if you don't have the long-term maintenance, then it's going to fall back on them, and they don't have the resources to do that. So we can't do our roadside pollinator habitat program alone. It really requires partnerships with a lot of different groups. State and federal agencies and a lot of private organizations. Before I get into a couple of examples, I do want to mention that we have a partnership with our soil and water conservation districts, and in southern Ohio this summer we had a contract with them to physically walk 100 miles of 4-lane highway to do a milkweed assessment, and they marked stands of 25 stems and greater. And Ohio is a little behind the 8 ball on having a GIS-based inventory of our vegetation assets. We can tell you exactly where we have a drainage pipe and how big it is and how long it's been there, but we can't tell you with any accuracy how much grass we mow and how much or what our vegetation assets are. And so that project was really successful. We got a lot of great information from them. In addition to the milkweed assessment, we had them look at 12 sites that we had identified for future development, and they did soil studies for us and vegetation and wildlife assessments. So we have some data that's going to be measurable when we develop those sites. We can come back and see if what we did was effective. But as I said, we do a lot of these public-private partnerships. Starting up in the upper left-hand corner, the Wilds is a conservation area. It's a reclaimed strip mine. And working with Zane State College, there's a new product that came out. It's a 100% biodegradable soil erosion control sock that's filled with switchgrass straw, and we're putting milkweed seed in it too, so we can put additional stems up in high areas and steep slopes that we normally wouldn't develop into a roadside habitat. The National Wild Turkey Federation contacted us early in the season and said that they have the labor, equipment, and materials to develop a site for us. And so in exchange for them using 3 acres of one of our outposts and a recognition sign, they're doing all the work. And from that was born a 4-year maintenance agreement that we're now using when we work with private organizations that they sign to do the long-term maintenance and monitoring for us. So yes, we have our roadside pollinator habitat program, but we also have facilities in all 88 counties, and so it makes sense for us to use the idle ground that we're just mowing at those facilities and do these urban pollinator habitats as well. And so the Friends of the Laurel and Tangi watershed contacted us and said that they'd like to do a project to protect their watershed. They did a demonstration garden by our state fairgrounds and then secured funding to do 17 acres on our North Outer Belt. So that was a great partnership. So ODOT is a huge organization. We have a $2 billion annual budget. And believe it or not, our annual milkweed pod collection last year generated more positive news stories than any other story in ODOT's history. So the public really seized that opportunity to make a difference. We worked with this year all 88 soil and water conservation districts around the state to be drop-off points. Once the seeds or the seed pods are dropped off, the Division of Wildlife with the Department of Natural Resources collects them and takes them to our prisons, and the prisoners process the seeds and repackage them and grow them into plugs for us to put back on the right-of-way. So the story was that ODOT's working well with its other state agencies and the community, that we're using these 19,000 miles of roadsides that we have more effectively, which is better use of taxpayer money. We do a lot of outreach events to get the word out. We've been to 5 tabling events this year. For some of our controversial groups and people who are questioning our use of herbicides and other issues, we'll take out on-site visits to see what's actually in the roadside vegetation and the whole biodiversity, and explain the process to them. And they have a better understanding, and it's gained a lot of support from those groups. We partnered with Keep Ohio Beautiful. Their 3 pillars include litter prevention, and beautification. And so when they do events, they mention ODOT, and when we do events, we mention Keep Ohio Beautiful. They're one of our strongest partners. And there was a state house planting day last month. Then they planted a new section of native wildflowers that are pollinator friendly at the State House, and so we got some press coverage for that. And finally, giveaways. Our seed packets we give to schools and libraries and other groups when we're out in the community, and it gets a conversation going. And we have a lot of interest from groups in helping us with public-private partnerships as a result of our outreach efforts. So we're doing a red poppy remembrance garden in one of our rest areas next year, and the red poppy is not a native flower. we're using it as an ambassador, just like we use sunflowers. The public notices these things, and then that gets the conversation going about our roadside pollinator habitat program. The red poppy is the symbol of our victory of World War I. Next year marks the 100-year anniversary of the end of the war, and we're partnering with America's largest veterans organization, the American Legion, for a dedication ceremony on Memorial Day weekend. We're also putting in interpretive signage to talk about, you know, as Ohio's sacrifice during the war, and we're also planting cardinal flower and royal catchfly to add that perennial element to the garden. And then when the annuals die off, we're going to come back and put in a full roadside pollinator habitat. So I rushed through the last example there. Are any questions? Okay. Oh yeah, go ahead. Okay, so the way we set up our site visits is when we identify a location for development, we contact our own internal forces first to make sure there's not going to be a construction project that's scheduled in the next 5 years that's going to destroy the work that we're already doing. And people, organizations that are interested in developing it with us are invited out to look at the site, talk about the existing vegetation and wildlife. And then these other groups, when we present and then there's some questions and some controversy, we invite them out. We work with the Department of Natural Resources and other biologists to go out and to give those demonstrations. Yes?
If you have a family of milkweed seeds that you're having separated, do you have a place to send the flock to be gathered? They're starting to be economic value again.
That's a great question. Yeah, and we haven't gotten to that point yet. I would say last year was our first true effort, and we collected the 20 million seed. Yeah, I mean, any kind of benefit that we can get from this project, we'll explore. That's a great point. Thanks. Anyone else? Okay, thank you very much.